Beacon Press Audio presents A Worthy Piece of Work, The Untold Story of Madeline Morgan, and the Fight for Black History in Schools by Michael Hines. This audiobook is narrated by Andrew L. Barnes, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2020. Introduction. November 5th, 1943, Private Edward Butler, a black soldier in the U.S. Army, sent a letter back to the United States from North Africa. Written on the military's standard Victory Mail stationery, the letter was not to a sweetheart or family member, but to someone he had never met, an elementary school social studies teacher in Chicago, Illinois, half a world away. The letter read, "Dear Mrs. Morgan, I just read an article about you and your work. I'm writing to you to find out if I can get a copy of the Negro's history which was mentioned in Newsreel magazine. It is something I didn't learn in school, but would like to learn it. Now, I'll be glad when we are called brown soldier instead of Negro soldier. We are fighting and working for the same cause as everyone else from the States. Yours until, Edward." Butler's wartime request seemed strange at first, but he was not alone in finding Madeline Morgan, later Madeline Stratton Morris, and her Negro's history worthy of attention. Throughout the war years, hundreds of soldiers and civilians, principals and teachers, colleges and commissions, parents and students eagerly sought out Morgan and her pioneering work in black history. By the spring of 1944, just a year after Butler's correspondence, Morgan shared that hundreds of letters have been received expressing a desire to know something about the contributions of the Negro. The teacher's writing appeared in black academic journals like the Wilberforce Quarterly, Journal of Negro Education, and Negro History Bulletin, as well as predominantly white publications like the Elementary English Review, and even popular news magazines like PM and Time. The ideas and ideals of the primary school teacher from Chicago traveled as far south as South America, as far north as Maine, as far west as California, as distant as Italy and Africa, and even to the United States Office of Education in Washington, D.C. The reason behind the widespread interest in Morgan's work from educators, scholars, and individuals like Private Butler was that she had succeeded in spearheading one of the most profound educational efforts of the war years. Morgan had led a movement that resulted in the institution of black history as part of the curriculum of Chicago's public schools, then the second largest school system in the nation. Her work, the supplementary units for the course of instruction in social studies, constituted an intellectual campaign against the foundations of American racial prejudice, as bold and as necessary as the military effort to confront fascism abroad. Hailed by Fraser Lane, civic director of Chicago's Urban League, as one of the finest approaches to improvement in racial relations ever attempted, the units included the histories of West African civilizations and their connections to black culture in the Americas and elsewhere, depictions of slavery that address the horrors of the Middle Passage and the plantation system, the stories of black soldiers who defended democracy even while being denied its fruits, and the biographies of black artists, politicians, activists, and social leaders from the country's founding to the present day. The lessons combated the exclusion and marginalization of black America found in white-authored textbooks and demanded a place for black history at the center of the American story. As Morgan wrote in a note to teachers, the Negro has contributed to every phase of American history. In adventure, science, education, art, music, war, and labor, he has played a part. Morgan's work served as a model for cities and school districts across the nation, and she advised politicians, religious and civic leaders, and educators interested in the promotion of racial tolerance throughout the mid-1940s. Despite her notoriety during the war years, however, she has received little scholarly attention in the almost century since. Compelling but incomplete glimpses of her appear in larger volumes on race and education, women's activism, and public history. Yet a substantive work that explains her evolution as an educator, her success as a curriculum reformer and activist, and her legacy in the present has not yet been attempted. A worthy piece of work addresses this absence, situating Morgan and her contributions within education during the 1930s and 1940s that garnered her national and international attention within the broader movement for Black history and culture, and the rise of pluralist and intercultural education during the Second World War. The early Black history movement and the alternative Black curriculum. Morgan's efforts in the Chicago schools were part of a larger wave of scholarship and activism aimed at the preservation and promotion of Black history in the early 20th century, an intellectual and social project that historian Perot Dagbovie terms the early Black history movement. Although Black Americans' efforts to record and remember their past stretch back to the antebellum period, the years between 1915 and 1950 saw these early efforts expand, becoming highly organized and institutionalized. Carter G. Woodson, the Harvard-trained historian and educator remembered as the father of Negro history, both personified and precipitated this shift. In 1915, Woodson launched the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which through its yearly conferences and its publications, the Journal of Negro History and the Negro History Bulletin, centralized and systematized the study of the Black past. At the same time, Negro History Week, the precursor to Black History Month, an annual campaign created under the auspices of the association, brought Black history into communities and classrooms, making the association's work broadly accessible. Negro History Week, which Woodson described as one of the most fortunate steps ever taken by the association, revealed a major concern of the early Black history movement: the fight to reshape the school curriculum to which Black children were exposed. White supremacy and anti-Black racism were deeply embedded in the curriculum of America's schools in the early 20th century, particularly in history and social studies. White-authored textbooks cast Africa as a primitive wilderness, omitted the histories of African civilizations before European colonization, justified American slavery as a benevolent and necessary, although regrettable, institution, painted the Civil War as a tragic struggle between equally noble causes, claimed Reconstruction to be a period of chaotic misrule by Black people and carpetbaggers, and portrayed Black Americans in the present as a social problem instead of a people. Taken together, these historical discourses sent a clear message that Black people were racially inferior and deserved no equal place in American society. The connection between the school curriculum and white supremacy and the life or death consequences of that relationship were clear to Woodson, who wrote that this struggle was of greater importance than even the fight against lynching, because there would be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Aware that America's schools distorted history in order to uphold the logic of white supremacy, Black historians, educators, and activists created their own textbooks, magazines, lesson plans, children's books, and other instructional materials. Scholar Alana Murray names these efforts the alternative Black curriculum, a powerful term I adopt here to refer broadly to the pedagogical counternarrative created by Black scholars in order to provide a more accurate rendering of U.S. and world history in the United States. Woodson and the association were critical to the flowering of the alternative Black curriculum, and Woodson himself authored several groundbreaking textbooks, including The Negro in Our History, 1922, The Story of the Negro Retold, 1935, and African Heroes and Heroines, 1939, each of which influenced generations of students and teachers. In recent years, scholars have begun to shed light on both the early Black history movement and the alternative Black curriculum. However, there is
Sample complete. Ready to continue?